Hello and welcome to Speaking Spirit, where we talk about all things spiritual. Your host, John Moore, is a shamanic practitioner and spiritual teacher. And now, here's John.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. Wherever you are in the world and whatever time you are listening to this, and I will say good morning. I do this almost every time because I record this early in the morning usually. I'm a morning person. Not everybody is a morning person, but I like to be up before anybody else. The energy for me is clearer. There's not so much noise or mental interference or whatever's going on. So if you hear me sipping, that's coffee. I am a bit of a coffee aficionado, or coffee snob, as some people would call me. I sometimes do drink awful coffee, but when I have no other choice. But I do. I love my coffee. It's definitely a vice that that if I don't think I've ever tried to give it up. I don't know that I would be able to at this point in my life, but I recognize that and I work with it. So today, I'm going to talk about a topic that is extremely important to me and has come up quite a bit in my work lately. And that is the topic of mental health and spirituality and how they interplay. And of course, because I'm a shamanic practitioner, I will talk about these things through my own lens, right? Through the lens of shamanism. So I'm not going to talk about mental health from the perspective of Judaism or Buddhism, even though I practice Buddhism. So obviously my viewpoint is my viewpoint. The other thing I will say is that I am not a doctor or mental health professional. And so I am going to be speaking about mental health from a layperson's perspective. And nothing I say here should take the place of any, and I would say this to a client that I was working with as well. Nothing I say should replace any sort of professional help you may be getting. If you're having questions or issues about mental health and something I say contradicts something your doctor says or your therapist or whatever, they know you and they are professionals, and they should, what they say should supersede that. And the stuff I'm talking about, this is just my viewpoint and my opinion. It's not advice in any way. Particularly in this podcast. And I do have episodes of this podcast where the things that I say are more practical. They're more, instructive. It's more advice. And those will always be areas in which I do have expertise. I don't, I try my best not to talk about things or give advice on things that I don't know anything about. I think there's too much of that in the world. All you have to do is spend some time on Facebook. And I have seen people on Facebook, for example, say, "Oh, I have this health problem," and they'll, post a photograph of some skin condition or something, and they're, "What is this?" And then instantly, 100 people chime in, "Oh, that's this. Oh, you should do this with all this contradictory stuff." And when I see that, I'm like, you should go get that checked out by a doctor, and not listen to medical advice from people who are not doctors, but who have no shortages of opinion. So with regards to anything related to health, mental health included, and we in the United States anyway, we really artificially divide health and mental health and dental health and vision health, basically for financial purposes. A lot of insurance companies. We don't have universal health care in the United States. I think that's a shame, because the vast majority of developed countries in the world have that. And, 30% of bankruptcies in the United States are, include medical costs. People lose their homes because they get sick. Good, hardworking people whose, insurance doesn't cover everything. And particularly during the pandemic, people are, getting bills of tens of thousands of dollars from the hospitals. It's just our way of doing things here is insane and unsustainable. And this is not a political rant. It's not a political thing at all, and it doesn't have to be. It just doesn't make sense, the way that we have a for-profit healthcare system. And I could rant about that for a long time, and I do have some expertise in this, in that, I've looked at these, with an expert. I was married to somebody who's an expert in healthcare and did graduate research in healthcare systems and that sort of thing. So I'm not an expert, but I talk to people who are, and none of what we do makes sense here. Anyway, so I'm going to talk about mental health and the intersection with spirituality. And one of the reasons this is so important to me is that I have, and I've talked about my own struggles with mental health. I write about them. I have written about them extensively. I've written articles. I've had very recently an article published, an interview where I talked about using gratitude to help combat depression. So, and talked about the research behind that. But I came into, I've always been a spiritual person, so I would not say that I came into spirituality due to mental health issues. But, sort of later on in my life, I went through a real mental and physical health crisis. And I, didn't know then, but I know now that would have been considered in many cultures a shamanic crisis, meaning that it's a initiation, right? And in some cultures, you have to go through a crisis such as that to become a shaman, to even start training to be a shaman. And so when I began my path to shamanism, it was part of my quest to regaining mental health. I had PTSD undiagnosed for many, many years from childhood trauma. I went through some pretty severe stuff that I won't describe in this program because I don't, not that I haven't come to grips with it, I have. I don't want to re-traumatize anybody else. And there's this secondary trauma thing that happens. Sometimes it happens to me when I hear stories from clients or people that I love about trauma that they've experienced. It's somewhat traumatizing to me because we, as human beings, most of us care about other people and we can empathize. So I don't want that to happen. And it's not really significant to the conversation other than to say that I experienced fairly significant childhood trauma. Lived with and it lived with a lot of stuff, and it seemed really normal to me, depression, dissociation, anxiety, flashbacks. I had no idea for most of my life that these things weren't things that most people experience. And things kind of came to a head, and I went through this really big crisis. I lost a tremendous amount of weight, not in a healthy way. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I was having panic attacks. I was having flashbacks, severe depression, all kinds of stuff going on. It was definitely a real crisis. And all along, I have been, for many, many, many years of my life, since a child, really, I have been an avid meditator and meditation. I'm, certified from at least one organization to teach meditation. And it's an important part of my life. And I would meditate daily to sort of help with things, to help with the anxiety, to help with the depression and everything else that was going on. And that it was helping, but it was too much. There was too much going on for just meditation to help that. And one day I was meditating in my office, and I heard a very, very clear male voice say, "You need to go learn shamanism." And this was a weird thing to me because I knew nothing about shamanism. I didn't understand what that word meant. I had heard the word, I thought of, people in South America or in Asia, Siberia, Mongolia, and Peru. And I thought, how am I going to learn shamanism? Like, how is that going to happen? But the voice is very compelling. And I thought to myself, geez, I live in the state of Maine in the United States. I don't live in Peru. I don't have the resources or the time to travel to Peru and find a teacher. I don't know if they would even take somebody from, the United States as a student. Like, how is this going to happen? So, as it turns out, where I live, there is a sizable and healthy shamanic community. And there's some amazing teachers here, some of what I would consider the best known in the world, and some of the best teachers are here. And I found my teacher and began my journey. And it has really turned my life around, changed my life in profound and significant ways. So again, this is not a prescription if you are suffering from PTSD. I'm not telling you to go out and study shamanism. This just happened to be my path. And it happened to be a path that provided a lot for me, and a lot of support and a lot of what I needed, as well as helping me heal, because it's a healing path as well. And along the lines, and I went into it just, I'm going to work on myself. That was my original goal. And I had no inclination to help other people at that time. Really, I was just wrapped up in my own stuff. And I, if I had even thought about it, I probably would have thought, well, how can I help other people? I can't even help myself at this point. So over time, over many years of training and learning everything I could, and taking, teacher training and all of these things, I found out that I had a penchant for certain types of work. I help a lot of people with trauma. In the beginning, I think about 100% for the first couple of years of practice of my clients had childhood trauma. And it wasn't because I was specifically advertising for that or whatever. I think there was what we call wound resonance, meaning people could tell that I had been through the same things that they had, or similar things that they had been through. So that was, a lot of the clients who came to me with trauma, and I worked with them. And there is a shamanic practice for treating trauma. It's called soul retrieval. That being said, I think I have always been an advocate of sort of an overkill approach, maybe, like doing everything one can to affect one's situation. So if you had a health problem, for example, let's say you found out you had diabetes and they put you on prescriptions for that. Maybe you were taking metformin, maybe you were taking insulin, whatever it was. And that is one angle of attack. right? That's one way of affecting this problem. But what they would also recommend for you probably would be exercise and diet changes, right? And that would be, I think, a fantastic idea, right? Let's go at this problem from multiple angles, and do everything you can within reason to help yourself through a health issue. And so I think the same thing was true for me. I'm definitely in that camp for mental health. I definitely was talking to therapists. I had I never went on medication per se, but I was taking supplements prescribed by a naturopath. I had some tests done, and my adrenals were off, and my serotonin and dopamine were low, and a bunch of stuff was physically messed up. So worked on straightening that out. Diet, exercise, meditation, shamanic practice. I did everything I could. And I will say that they will tell you, if you are diagnosed with PTSD, they will say there is no cure for PTSD. And I don't know what the definition of cure is medically, what they would have to happen for there to be a cure. I will say that I have been living pretty much 100% symptom-free for a very long time, for many, many years. So I'm, not going to argue with people who know more than I do about medical diagnoses and prognoses and all of that sort of thing. But what I do want to say is that I don't think, I want to offer some hope if you are experiencing trauma symptoms. I don't think they have to be permanent, right? And that's the thing that gave me hope when things have come around again, or, I went through something else traumatic, and, it sort of revivified a lot of this stuck stuff, and had a little bit of soul loss from that. And, reminding myself, like, hey, listen, you've got through this before. It's not permanent. If you're feeling some depression or having flashbacks or whatever, it's not a permanent state. You're not stuck there forever. And I think when I was going through the worst of my crisis, that thought that this is how my life is going to be from now on, that thought was something that happened frequently for me and was really devastating. So if I can help you in any way today, and you are, struggling in some way with any kind of mental health disorder, I just want you to know that it's not no state is ever permanent. You can, get treatment, you can work on yourself. There's all kinds of things. So how this has come into my life and my practice recently, I'm going to talk a lot about the word psychosis, which is a medical term basically for having a break with reality. And we talk about people having psychotic episodes or being diagnosed with conditions that include psychoses and all of these things. So having a break from reality, having what we might consider hallucinations and delusions, and hallucinations being having sensing things that aren't real, seeing things, hearing things that quote unquote aren't real, and having delusions, like having beliefs that things aren't real. So, a stereotypical thing, paranoid delusions, or, people are watching me, or, that sort of thing. And, hallucinations can be anything. Frequently they're auditory. Who knows, when I was meditating and heard a male voice saying, you need to learn shamanism, I took that as a sign from spirit. It was very compelling, and I followed up on it. And, some people would say that was an auditory hallucination. And it's hard. Gosh, it's hard. When I practice something like shamanism, it's hard to draw the line, but I'm going to try to do that. And I had a conversation with a therapist very recently, basically, talking about how do I do that? How do I talk about mental health and psychoses when I basically in journey, I'm experiencing an altered state of reality and, seeing things that other people can't see. And how do, some people would consider that a hallucination or delusion or what have you. How do I put that in context? So I explain to people kind of the difference. So I'm gonna attempt really strongly to do that today, because I think it's important to me, and I think it's probably important to others. So the way that this therapist explained it to me was that the difference between myself and what I do as a practice and what people are going through who are having, experiencing a psychotic episode is that my work is contained. So when I journey, it is intentional. It happens during a set period of time. We'll call this the container. The journey is the container. I purposely alter my consciousness. I tend to use drums or rattles. I know what I'm doing. I go into a theta brainwave state, and I journey. And then when I come back, I'm back. This isn't to say that sometimes I don't see or hear spirits when I'm not journeying. But when I do, when it happens, and I've seen some weird stuff. I've definitely seen some paranormal stuff. But I always question whether that's actually real, right? So I'm questioning, okay, I saw what appeared to be a woman on my back porch, and when I thought it was somebody, and when I went around, there was nobody there. Did I actually see that? Well, 2 other people saw the same thing. Okay, so, and I know that the mind plays tricks on us. Like, we see faces and all kinds of things. People see faces and burnt pieces of toast and all kinds of stuff. And that is an effect that the mind does, where it's trying to make sense out of sensory input. So it places interpretation on things. But if I experience something that is outside of sort of normal reality for me, I do test that. I do reality testing. Like, okay, is this something I've actually experienced? Did anybody else witness it? Is there another potential explanation? I try to, as much as I can, take a little bit of a scientific approach. That's not always possible. And so things that I can't explain have not been witnessed by somebody else, and I take them for, okay, I had an experience, and I don't quite know what to make out of it unless something else comes along to explain it. So that's a thing. Very recently I have had quite a few people contact me looking for help or looking to connect or what have you, who we would say from, I'm sure that, somebody who was in a profession that was allowed to diagnose people would say they were having a psychotic episode. The difference being, these people are experiencing things that are outside of what we would consider normal reality. They're not at the time on drugs or meditating or doing any sort of shamanic journey. There's no container for it, right? This is just happening to them all the time, constantly during their waking time. They're also 100% convinced that all of it is real. Okay, so people who are having, a psychotic episode think everything that they're seeing, hearing, experiencing is 100% real. So, one thing you cannot really do with somebody who, if you encounter somebody who's having a psychotic episode, you would not tell them that what they're experiencing isn't real. That would be like me telling you that your shoes aren't real. You go, no, they're on my feet. Look at them. I can see them. They're right there. That's the same level of, in my understanding, that's the same level of reality that these people are experiencing. And it's important, if you encounter somebody like that, to be compassionate. And the recommendations that I've read also say don't question their reality, but don't feed into it. And that's a really hard tightrope to walk. It has been for me. And the way that I get around, or the way that I get through that, is to talk about how they're feeling about what they're experiencing. So, somebody contacted me, and he sees the people around him as fallen angels who are out to get him, and XYZ. And I said, wow, it sounds like you're having something, sounds like you're very frightened. So I'm acknowledging how he's feeling. Okay, so I can be empathetic and compassionate in that way. So the delusional part is the belief. The delusional part is what is real. Okay, and that isn't sort of matching up. So the big question becomes, are these people who are having these psychotic breaks having spiritual experiences that are, somewhat uncontrolled or whatever, or is it just stuff their mind is making up? That's a hard question for me to answer, but my take on it is this. I think people who are going through that are taking in a whole bunch of input, right? Just a whole bunch of input from non-sensory input. So we'll say that some mechanism of consciousness has gone awry, and the filters that are normally there aren't, and the mind becomes overwhelmed and tries to make sense out of the input that comes in, and so people see fallen angels and demons and all kinds of things. So some of that input might be from spiritual realms. So people might be operating at a level where they're perceiving what we might call the middle world, in which middle world spirits, when I journey, there are a lot of them, and they come in lots of different forms. But they're not doing a journey. It's not in a container where they're like, okay, I can stop experiencing these things now. They can't. So then, a question was put to me recently by somebody who is becoming a student of mine, who asked me, is it true that in some cultures you had to have had a psychotic break or something to become a shaman? And that is relatively true. There's this idea of the shamanic crisis, meaning in some cultures, what we call shamanic cultures, that they're cultures where there is a role of shaman that is a historical and ongoing part of the culture, to be chosen to be initiated into shamanism and to learn from shamanic elders and that sort of thing, one has to have gone through some kind of crisis, and that could be mental health, it could be physical. In some places, getting hit by lightning. There's all kinds of things, and there are cultures where shamanism is hereditary. There's cultures, so there's different ways of choosing, but in effect, you had to have gone through, some kind of crisis. So it leads me to a really important point about spiritual help for mental health issues. So again, if somebody comes to me and they have some sort of, severe mental health issue, I'm going to recommend, in fact, I'm probably going to insist that they work with a doctor or therapist first and coordinate with me. And I've had lots of experiences with clients who are like, asking me, is it okay if I tell my therapist about you? And I'm like, well, actually, I think it would be a really good idea if you told your therapist about me and the work that we're doing together. And, if there's any way we can coordinate, that would be fantastic. And I've had, met lots of really supportive people in both the medical community and therapeutic community. Lots of people that I have trained with are, in fact, physicians, which I think is an interesting thing. Not like it's not contradictory, in my opinion, that these are scientifically minded people with medical training who are studying a spiritual field. I don't take contradiction from that. It might on the surface seem contradictory, but these people are healers, and they recognize that this is part of their path, and that people aren't just machines. They're not just collections of biological material, that we're body, mind, and spirit. And so there are multiple dimensions to every human being. So, somebody who's in the midst of a uncontrolled psychotic episode, who would come to me, I would try to help them and steer them towards help. But I wouldn't work with them shamanically. And this is not because I am being cruel or uncaring or unempathetic. I am absolutely empathetic and compassionate towards people who are suffering in any way. And people have asked, well, in shamanic cultures, they would just go to a shaman. Absolutely, that's true, because they, for one, they don't have, in some of these cultures, they don't have access to as modern healthcare as we have here. But there's a second part of that, and so in some of these cultures, and I've read about instances from, Africa and South and Central America and Asia, Tibet in particular, where, somebody is going through, experiencing psychosis. Maybe they would be diagnosed with schizophrenia or something by modern doctors, and they're brought to a shaman. And what happens sometimes in these cases is that the person is taken in. They might even move in with the shaman, and the shaman works with them, 24 hours a day, right? And they provide community for them. The community gathers around them. That in itself is amazingly healing. And they're working for long periods of time, 24 hours a day. I can't do that for somebody. And even if I could, even if my life would manage it, like, we don't live in a culture that supports that. we don't live in a tribal culture where people would gather around like that and work on somebody's, recovery from a crisis. So while it's true that shamanic healing has been used for millennia to treat people going through crises like this, modern shamanism isn't adapted well for that. Right? When I see clients, it's usually for a couple hours at a time, and not every day. Not even usually once a week. I usually, if I see clients repeatedly, it might be, 3, 5, 6 weeks apart. Particularly if there's soul retrieval work going on and they have time to do that. But also most people have, other lives that they have to attend to. They have bills to pay. We live in a society where, you have to have money to live. So, unfortunately, when people come to me and they're in my opinion, really suffering from a psychotic episode and they've lost complete touch with reality and they want help because they think that gods and goddesses and demons and things like that are after them. I have to try to steer them towards competent mental health help. And, if they can get that and they can get stabilized and, I would work with their therapist or their doctor. If they can get stabilized and work on some healing with them. Because I think those things can work really well in tandem. But I, above all, do my absolute best to practice impeccable ethics. And it would be unethical for me to take somebody on that I knew would not be helped. And in fact, might be harmed, right? I don't know. I don't know if what I do and if I do, some sort of spiritual work with somebody, if it's going to make the break worse, the break from reality. I don't know that. And so that concerns me. It concerns me that about anybody that, I've never left a client worse off than when they came in. And I hope to never, ever have that happen. I would feel absolutely terrible, and I would worry that I have violated my sense of ethics in some way. So, again, like I'm not going to work with somebody who refuses to get other help and who is in a condition that I can't affect effectively. And so that's sort of, that part of it. That being said, somebody who is experiencing depression or some other things, shamanic healing can frequently be very helpful for that. And again, I think it's important to work in tandem with your other professionals, because we don't live in a culture where you would move into my home and I would, we would work together 24 hours a day to work on whatever was happening. And that does happen still some places in the world. There are, healers where you go live with them for a period of time, maybe a month or two, maybe longer. But that's not the world. That's not the culture that I live in, and my life and the way that the world is set up around me can't really affect that. So that's sort of on the topic of psychosis, and I've struggled with this for a while because I don't ever want to seem judgmental towards people who are having mental health issues, because, first of all, nobody wants that. Nobody is in control of that. I didn't want to have PTSD. I didn't want to experience anxiety and depression. And if I could have made it go away, I would. But we have this weird thing, maybe not where you live, but here where we kind of, treat people with mental illness, we kind of stand back from them a little bit. Like there's a lot of weird stigma around mental illness in the United States, and I've seen it in other countries as well. But definitely in the United States where I live, there's still stigma around mental health. It's becoming less, and lots of people talk about talking to therapists and stuff. And I think that's healthy. I think, having the conversation, there's, increasing conversation about mental health I see from athletes and movie stars and stuff. And as much as people look up to those, people in those roles, I guess that, that's a good thing, to bring it to light, that the people look up to, everybody, every walk of life, every socioeconomic status, every level of education, everything, mental illness doesn't discriminate. And so it's really important that we are kind and compassionate and try to understand when somebody is depressed. This was a big one for me. And I experienced depression as a result of my PTSD, and there was all kinds of messages out there that is like, well, if you're feeling depressed, just take a walk in the woods. I know walking in the woods is helpful, but it didn't cure me. It didn't solve my problem. And, some people, when you describe or say, I'm feeling depressed or I have depression, they're like, well, what do you have to be depressed about? And the answer to that is there doesn't have to be a reason for someone to be depressed. Yes, you can have a depressed mood for a reason. Depression can be part of the grieving process, right? So somebody close to me dies, I get very sad about that, and that's a reason. But that's not how depression works. Yes, depression will lead to thoughts. So, what happens, at least from my perspective, is you have these horrible feelings. There's more to depression than feeling sad. Trust me, it is sometimes physically painful. Somebody with severe depression, you can draw their blood and they will have the same inflammatory markers in their blood as somebody with the flu. So think about how you felt when you've had the flu. Pretty darn lousy, right? You don't want to get out of bed. You feel weak. You don't want to move. You can't think straight. So besides being incredibly sad or having very low mood or having no emotion, which is, can happen as well, having really flat level of emotion, depression actually hurts sometimes. And it makes you weak, and it makes you not able to sleep, and it makes you all kinds of things. It can make you gain and lose weight. I lost, an interesting note, I lost 60 pounds, and not in a very healthy way, and I really didn't have any more to lose. My doctors were concerned about my health. I couldn't eat. My appetite was gone. Very similar to if you've ever been really sick with the flu, excuse me, and you don't feel like eating. So, so I took some supplements and tried to help with that. So, there's a physical aspect as well. So, the things that are people like, well, what do you have to be depressed about? Or, just don't feel sad anymore, or, whatever. If people with severe depression could choose not to be depressed, they would. Trust me on that. Nearly 100% of the time. It is not a choice. In the same exact way that people with cancer do not choose to have cancer, and if they could choose not to have cancer, they would. Nobody would choose to have cancer. Nobody chooses to have depression. Trust me, it is sometimes suffering to a magnet. If you've never experienced it before, good, that's good. But if you've ever experienced severe depression, it is like nothing else. It is just suffering. And so we need to have compassion for people who are suffering, because they're human beings and they deserve it. And it does not matter what your diagnosis with anything is, or if you have no diagnosis, as a human being, you deserve love. You deserve more love, not less. And so sometimes, in some places, the way we treat people who are suffering with mental health issues is extremely inhumane, and we don't have to go very far back in history to see that, and we don't have to go back at all. We can see people living on the streets, and there was a study at one point, I don't know, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, that at least 25% of people living on the street, people with, who are homeless, had diagnosed mental health problems. A good portion of them probably had undiagnosed mental health problems, which were not made better by being homeless, certainly exacerbated. We also, stuff happens, and we tend to put a lot of people with mental health issues in jail and prison, because sometimes there is criminal behavior, although I will say this, that most criminal behavior is not committed by people with a mental health issue. That's another thing. And people who are, schizophrenic or depressed or have anxiety or whatever are not more likely to commit violence against other people. So sometimes there's this fear that people who are quote unquote crazy, and I realize that is a hateful term, but I'm using it in that context here, like people who say these things are misunderstanding and being cruel and bigoted. So people who are suffering and people who are crazy are likely to, be dangerous and hurt them. The opposite is the truth. People with mental health conditions are actually more likely to be victims of violence than to be perpetrators, because we don't protect people, and they very often become marginalized and don't receive the help that they need, and are in precarious positions, where they can be abused and that sort of thing. So as spiritual people, it behooves us to be the example of people, of how people are to be treated in the world. And, the golden rule, whether you are Christian or Buddhist or something else, the golden rule is, treat other people as you yourself would want to be treated. Would you want people to marginalize you or make up stories about you, about what, you're, or not give you help if you were suffering and needed it? And so that applies, and being spiritual, that should apply even more, because you should realize the reality of that. You should realize that we're all connected, and, the way that we treat everyone, comes back to us because we're connected. So it's really important to take these things into consideration. So I'm not going to have, normally when I do these podcasts, I may wrap up with some really specific recommendations about things you can do. When I talked about ancestors ancestral spirits recently, I talked about things like you might set up an altar or, that sort of thing. So I'm not going to offer some really concrete advice today. And the reason is, as I outlined in the beginning, I don't know, like, if you're listening to this and you have some sort of diagnosis, or somebody who has some sort of diagnosis, that's not something I don't know, and I can't give you some general advice about that. I will say this, though. If I think pursuing spirituality in whatever form that takes for you, along with the other things that you can do to ensure your health, helps to create a more rounded healing experience, and can be very healing. I do think that if you are suffering from a break with reality, that you should be careful about the type of things and information that you consume. So the person I spoke to recently, who was seeing fallen angels everywhere, was, I'm sure, in the middle of a psychotic episode. He went to bed one night with, movies about fallen angels playing on his TV, and he woke up the next morning and all he was seeing was fallen angels. So I'd be super careful about that sort of thing. The problem is, again, the delusional part of psychosis is that you believe that all of these things are real. As much as if you're not, I'm sitting at a table and I knock on the table and this feels real to me and I can see it, and I believe this table is real and exists in 3D reality. That is as real as the things that people are experiencing in psychosis, right? So, how does that play? So the trouble is, people believe this stuff is real, so they don't think they necessarily need help with mental health, although they're suffering. So they might reach out, but they might reach out to somebody like me, and I will always try to steer them towards mental health help. And I hope other spiritual practitioners would do the same. It doesn't matter what you practice, if it's, Reiki or some other form, some energy healing or some sort of other spiritual healing. Do the right thing, please. Steer these people towards resources that can get them stabilized into reality, and then work with them. Work with them on healing the suffering after you help them get some help. And most of the time people are not going to want to hear that. They're not going to want to hear, hear that they need some help, and the vast majority of the people who contact me in cases like this, I'll ask them, do you have any mental health diagnosis? Are you on any medication? They will very frequently tell me, I was on antipsychotic medication and it made me feel bad, so I stopped taking it. So it is really hard to convince somebody who is, who's going through that, who has been on medication and made the conscious decision to stop because it was making them feel so bad, to go back and seek some help and get stabilized. But you have to try. We have to do what we can, because it's, if you're not working to heal people and help people in the best possible way, then, in the way that's best for them, regardless of your personal prejudices or need to earn money or anything else, then you're not being ethical, in my opinion. And I would say, most, if not all, spiritual practitioners I know are extremely ethical. I've only run across a couple of cases where I felt people had overstepped a little bit, not consciously ever. I haven't run into that where somebody's been like, oh, I'm going to take this person for a ride. But that is out there, certainly. Certainly it's out there that there are people who are looking to take advantage of other people. Fortunately, nobody who is my friend, or they wouldn't be my friend. But yeah, I mean, I take ethics extremely important, and the people that I have learned from. So my main teacher, especially, if she got wind, she got wind one time that somebody had talked to me about teaching a specific class. And there was a misunderstanding about it. There was a misunderstanding on my part, for sure. And I thought they were asking for one thing, and they were asking for something else that I would not have agreed to and not have taught. And she got wind of it, and she got in touch with me immediately. And she said, "Well, this person, expects to learn this from you." And I go, "Oh, no. Okay, I'm sorry." So, so my teacher, and then her, and her teacher before her, really just call people to the mat for ethical reasons. And when I teach, I always talk a lot about ethics, and, there's specific, there's specific ethical rules in shamanism. There aren't really rules, but ethical guidelines that I follow, that I teach as well. Things like I don't work on people without their permission, with very rare exceptions to that. Exceptions would be somebody is actually physically unconscious, like in a coma or something, and cannot consent to something. But consent's super important. And again, like even if I thought if somebody was conscious and having a mental health crisis, and I felt like somebody might think that they are not in a condition to give consent, I probably still would not work with that person. It's just too close to the ethical boundaries for me. So I keep very tight boundaries around what I do, the work that I'll do. I won't take on work that I don't have an affinity or skill for, So, this is a little off topic, but for example, I absolutely love and adore animals. I love wildlife. I love pets, but I don't do animal work. It's not a skill that I have. And I have there are other people I know who are fantastic with doing work on animals. And I've assisted people who are working on animals. But if somebody came to me and said, can you do a healing on my dog who is, going through some stuff or whatever, I would not. I would say, thank you for contacting me. I don't do that type of work, but I would be very happy to refer you to somebody who does and who I think is a fantastic practitioner. So there's another piece of ethics is not to go beyond, have a reasonable idea about what you can do, and don't go beyond that in a way that somebody could be, paying for something or losing time or, what have you. So, if a friend came to me and said, "Hey, do you think you could work on my dog?" And it wasn't sort of I might say something like, "It's not really my work. I could try it," that sort of thing. I might still not, even in that circumstance. But in a professional setting, I would not work beyond my skills. So, I'm just speaking to practitioners out there. If you're listening to this and you're a practitioner, really try to work with people and have them get the professional, whatever you feel of the medical establishment, Try to get them the professional help they need from licensed professionals. Even if you can decide to continue to work with them, work in tandem. And, you'll find that there are doctors and therapists and nurses and nurse practitioners out there who are very open to energy healing and shamanic healing and all of that sort of thing. So with that, I'm going to wrap up for the day. I hope this has been helpful. And I would encourage you, if you are somebody who is suffering from any sort of mental health disorder, please reach out for help. Please get the help that you need. It is out there. It can be challenging to find, but it is completely worth it. It's worth it to get better, and you deserve, you deserve to feel joy. You deserve every bit of love and compassion in the world. Just from the sheer fact that you exist, you deserve all of that. So look out for yourselves. I love you all, and I will talk to you next time.
You have been listening to Speaking Spirit with your host, John Moore. For more info or to contact John, go to mainshaman.com. That's maineshaman.com.